What if the man you trusted most in this world, your billionaire husband, left your baby crying alone in the rain? I came home to find my son abandoned, my mother-in-law calling him a bastard, and my husband standing there, doing nothing. I had to make a choice that would change everything for me and my child. But that wasn't the end of the story. What happened next shocked everyone, and it taught him the lesson he'd never forget. Stay tuned to hear the twist that no one saw coming. I never thought I'd find myself standing on the porch of my home, holding my baby in my arms, drenched in rain, listening to my mother-in-law's biting words echoing in the cold, dark night. "I don't raise bastards," she sneered, her voice cold as ice, as though my child in my arms was nothing more than a mistake, a stain on her perfect family name. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil that had been building inside me for weeks. How had it come to this? How had I found myself standing in this place? A place I had once called home, where I was being judged for a child I loved more than life itself. But there I stood, holding Namdi, my son, in my arms, staring at my husband. Chijiok, the billionaire I had married, the man I had once believed would be my forever. He was standing there emotionless, cold, his eyes vacant as if he were a stranger. I had always known the pressure of the Okoro name, the legacy that came with it. I was taught that to be an Okoro meant to hold your head high, to live in perfection, to meet expectations that no one ever seemed to acknowledge were suffocating. But Chijiok? Chijiok was the man who had everything, or so I thought. He had money, status, power. But it was all meaningless the moment he looked at our son, Namdi, and didn't see a child but an inconvenience. "You should have never come back," my mother-in-law hissed, her voice seeping with disdain. "Now look at what you've done. You've dragged our family name through the mud." Chijiok didn't speak. He didn't say a word. And that silence was deafening. He had always been a man of few words, but this was more than just silence. It was an acceptance of the cruelty being thrust upon me, and the child I had carried for 9 months. I wanted to scream, to shout that none of this was my fault. But the words caught in my throat. Instead, I turned away, clutching Namdi tightly in my arms, and whispered to him, "Mama's here. I won't let anyone hurt you." And in that moment, the decision was made. I would never allow my son to feel rejected, not by anyone. Not by the man I once loved, not by the woman who should have been his grandmother. I wasn't just walking out on Kajijiokai, was walking out on everything I thought I knew about family. Chijiok's silence didn't change. The days turned into weeks, and the weight of his indifference began to sink in deeper. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was invisible, that I no longer mattered to the man who had once sworn to love and cherish me. His rejection wasn't just emotional, it was physical. The cold stares, the long silences, the dismissive gestures. The worst part was when he looked at Namdi. There was no love, no affection, no recognition of our son as his flesh and blood. It started with the small things. The absence of kindness, the refusal to even acknowledge that Namdi existed. I would come home from long shifts, exhausted and desperate for some semblance of family warmth, only to be met with the same cold walls. No embrace, no comforting words. Just a house that felt emptier by the day. I tried everything. I cooked his favorite meals. I kept the house spotless. And I made sure Namdi was always clean, always happy. But none of that mattered, not to Chijiok. He would disappear into his office for hours, days even, leaving me and Namdi in a house full of silence. And then it happened. It was a Thursday evening. I had just finished working a late shift at the diner and walked in, hoping that maybe, just maybe, tonight would be different. But as soon as I opened the door, I saw him, Chijiok, standing there with his back to me, speaking to someone on the phone. The room felt colder than it ever had, and that silence that had settled over our marriage felt louder than ever. But it wasn't the silence that shattered me, it was what came next. I heard the unmistakable sound of Namdi crying from the porch. My heart skipped a beat. I rushed outside, dread coursing through me, to find my son, my sweet, innocent child, lying on the cold concrete, drenched in the pouring rain. His tiny hands were clenched into fists, his face red from the cold, his cries echoing in the night. I froze. Why is he out here? I screamed, running to him, panic and fury exploding in my chest. Chijiok didn't move. He just stood there, watching. My mother-in-law, standing beside him, crossed her arms and stared at me with cold, judgmental eyes. "I don't want that bastard in this house," she hissed. Her words hit me like a slap, but it was Chijiok's silence that struck. Deeper, he didn't even flinch. He didn't move.
He didn't even care. I scooped Namdi up, trembling, trying to shield him from the rain.
But all I felt was the crushing weight of betrayal. My baby, my son, had been treated like an outcast, abandoned by the very people who were supposed to love him. And Chijiok? He stood there, indifferent. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My mind was a storm of thoughts and emotions, anger, betrayal, sadness, confusion. How could this be happening? How could the man I loved, the man who had promised to take care of me, allow this? How could he stand by and watch his mother treat his son like an unwanted guest in their home? But the reality of it all crashed down on me. Chijiok had made his choice. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. I could not stay in a marriage where I was not valued. I could not raise my son in a place where he was rejected. It wasn't just the words my mother-in-law had said, it was the fact that Chijiok had let her say them, had let them happen. He had allowed me to suffer in silence, and he had allowed Namdi to suffer too. And that was the moment I decided. I was done. I would not let my son grow up in a place where he wasn't wanted. I wouldn't allow him to feel the weight of rejection the way I had for so long. I walked away that night, with Namdi in my arms, not looking back. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. Not with Chijiok. Not with his mother. I didn't have a plan, but I knew one thing for sure. I would never let anyone treat my son like that again. The twist, however, came the next morning. Chijiok called. His voice was softer than I had ever heard it. "Aliyah," he said, his words laced with something I hadn't heard before, guilt, maybe regret. "Please, come home. I was wrong." But it was too late. I had seen the truth. I had seen who he really was, and that truth would change everything. Leaving Chijiok behind was harder than I had anticipated. It wasn't just the physical space I was leaving, it was the life, the dreams, the future I had once believed in. I thought that by walking out I would feel liberated, but what I hadn't accounted for was the weight of the world on my shoulders. Suddenly, everything became real. There was no mansion to go back to, no servants to help take care of Namdi. It was just me and my son, alone in the world, trying to make it. The apartment I found wasn't much. It was a small, cramped space on the outskirts of Lagos, far from the luxury I had grown accustomed to in Chijiok's world, but it was ours. It was all I could afford, but that didn't matter. I held Namdi close every night, telling him, "We're safe now, baby. It's just you and me." But deep down, I was terrified. Terrified that I wouldn't be enough for him, that I wouldn't be able to provide what he needed. I worked tirelessly. The diner job was exhausting, but it was all I had. I woke up early, worked long hours, and came home only to collapse into bed next to Namdi, who had grown so used to the sound of my voice singing him to sleep. I thought that if I just worked hard enough, things would get better. I could keep him safe. I could make a life for us. But every day, the weight of my new reality hit me harder. The world outside was indifferent. People didn't care about a single mother working to make ends meet. People didn't care about a child without a father to guide him. I kept telling myself it would get better. But when you don't have the support of the man who's supposed to love you, and when your family rejects you, it's hard to believe that things will ever change. There were days when I couldn't make enough money to pay the bills. There were nights when I had to choose between buying food for Namdi or diapers. Every day was a constant battle to survive. And every day, Chijiok's absence was a cruel reminder of what I had lost. But still, I carried on. Because no matter how hard things got, Namdi needed me. And I couldn't let him grow up in a world without love, without care. I worked harder. I sacrificed more. I pushed myself to the limit. As the weeks passed, I began to adapt to my new life. I found a routine. I went to work at the diner, taking on extra shifts whenever I could. I spent my nights researching scholarships, trying to figure out a way to get back into school so I could build a better future for Namdi. It wasn't much, but it was something. I was fighting for us, one step at a time, but the battle was exhausting. I would come home, my body sore and aching, only to find that Namdi had grown more distant, more withdrawn. I knew he could feel the weight of the world on my shoulders, even though he was just a baby. And that broke me in ways I couldn't explain. Then one night, after a particularly long shift, I came home to find a letter from Chijiok waiting for me. My heart stopped when I saw his name on the envelope. I hadn't heard from him since the night I left. I wasn't sure what to expect, but the letter was different from anything I had imagined. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an offer to reconcile. No, it was a plea. A plea for forgiveness. The words on the paper were simple. Aliyah, I need you back. I've made a mistake. Please, for Namdi's sake, come home. I've realized that I can't do this without you. For a moment, I just stared at the letter, unable to comprehend what I was reading. How could he think that a few words could undo the pain he had caused? How could he think that, after everything, after leaving Namdi out in the rain, he could just come back and fix everything? But deep down, a part of me still wanted to believe. I wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, he had changed. That the man I had loved so deeply could come back and make things right. But another part of me knew the truth. The truth that I couldn't unsee. Chijiok wasn't the man I thought he was. He had abandoned us when we needed him most, and nothing could change that. I ripped the letter up. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I felt relief. Relief that I had made the right decision. That I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life, and Namdi's life. The next few days were a blur. I kept pushing forward, focusing on what mattered Namdi. But then, just when I thought I was free of the past, I received another call from Chijiok. Aliyah, he said, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. I know I don't deserve this, but please, I'm asking for a second chance. I want to make things right. Please, come back to me for Namdi. He deserves a family. His words stung, but I stayed calm. This wasn't about what I wanted. It wasn't about what Chijiok wanted. It was about Namdi. And Namdi deserved better than this. He deserved better than a man who would abandon him at the first sign of trouble. I told Chijiok what I should have said all along. I'm done. You had your chance. I'm not coming back. You've lost us. The line went silent. For the first time, I felt no hesitation. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I was free. Just as I hung up the phone, I realized something. In that moment, I wasn't just walking away from Chijiok. I was walking away from the life I had been living, from the chains of expectation and rejection that had kept me bound for so long. I was no longer defined by my relationship with Chijiok or his family. I was defined by my own strength, my own courage, and my love for Namdi. And as the days passed, I realized that the life I had once thought was perfect was never really mine. It was a life I had tried to fit into, but it wasn't meant for me. The life I was building now with Namdi by my side was the life I had always deserved. Chijiok had no idea that his actions had set me free.
He thought he could control me.
Control our future, but the truth was, I was in control now. I was in control of my own destiny. And nothing could take that away from me. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself settling into a routine. Life in the small apartment was far from perfect, but it was ours. Namdi was growing, laughing more, and learning to trust again. I did my best to provide for him, working long hours at the diner, and when I wasn't working, I was studying. Every free moment was spent looking for ways to build a better future for us. I started applying for scholarships, looking into online courses, anything to improve our lives. But there was a hole in all of this, a gnawing emptiness that kept tugging at my heart. The loneliness was overwhelming at times. Even though I had Namdi, I couldn't ignore the aching void of missing the family I thought I would have. I missed the idea of a happy home. I missed the dreams of a life where I wasn't constantly fighting to be seen, to be valued. I had spent so much of my life living for others, living for Chijiok and his family's approval, that I wasn't sure who I was anymore, and then, just as I was starting to find some peace, I received a call from Chijiok. I knew this call was coming. I had been waiting for it, in a way. And when I saw his name on the screen, my heart clenched. I hadn't heard from him in weeks, not since the last time he tried to beg me to come back. But something about his silence had made me wonder if he had truly changed. If maybe, just maybe, he was finally realizing what he had lost. But I was wrong. His voice came through the phone, familiar and distant at the same time. Aaliyah, I need to see you. I need to talk to you about Namdi. I can't do this without him. The words stung. They had no warmth. No sense of urgency that suggested he cared about me.
He wasn't asking about how I was or how Namdi was.
He wasn't even asking if I was okay. He was simply speaking to me like I was an object he had lost and now wanted back. In that moment, I felt a surge of anger, a fire that started deep in my chest and rushed to my head. How dare he? How dare he come back into my life after everything he had done? He had abandoned us when we needed him most. He had left me to carry the weight of the world alone. And now he was acting as if he was the one who needed saving? I've told you before, Chijiok. I'm not coming back. You had your chance and you lost us, I said, my voice steady, even though my heart was pounding. You can't fix this. You can't just come in and act like nothing happened. His silence was deafening. I could hear the frustration in his breath, but he didn't speak. Aaliyah, he started again, his voice barely above a whisper. I was wrong. I know that now. I've seen things in a way I never did before. I've seen what's been happening in my life, and I'm not the man I was. I could feel my body tense, and I had to stop myself from laughing. Chijiok, the man who had pushed me to the brink, who had broken me, was now asking for my forgiveness. But it wasn't for him, it was for Namdi. He had never been interested in me. It had always been about his reputation, about his family's expectations. I had given him everything. And he had thrown it away. You're asking me to forgive you, Chijiok? I asked, my voice sharp. I gave you everything. I believed in you. But you didn't just fail me, you failed Namdi. And that's something I will never forgive. I hung up the phone before he could respond. I wasn't going to listen to his apologies anymore. I wasn't going to let his empty words convince me that he had changed. He hadn't. He was still the same man who would never be there when I needed him. But despite my anger, despite my decision to move on, something in me still felt unsettled. The coldness of his words lingered. His voice had sounded different this time, almost as though he truly understood the weight of his actions. Or was it just another manipulation? The next few days were filled with the aftershock of that conversation. The anger I had felt in the moment began to ebb away, leaving me exhausted. And though I was resolute in my decision to never go back to him, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Maybe it was just his persistence, his willingness to fight for Namdi. Or maybe it was because part of me still wanted him to be the man I had once believed he was, the man I had fallen in love with. But as I looked at Namdi, my heart swelled with pride. He was thriving. He was safe. And that was all that mattered. I didn't need Chijiok's approval. I didn't need his validation. I had Namdi. I had myself. And that was more than enough. I had made it this far without him. I had kept my head above water, even when everything felt like it was drowning me. I had built a life for Namdi that was filled with love and security, something that Chijiok had never been able to give. The following weekend, as I sat at the kitchen table, studying for an exam while Namdi played with his toys on the floor, I heard the sound of a car pulling up outside. It was strange. Chijiok had never shown up uninvited. But as the doorbell rang, my stomach twisted with nerves. I opened the door, half expecting to see Chijiok standing there, but it wasn't him. It was Donovan Brooks. Donovan, the kind-hearted man who had taken me in when I had nowhere to go, who had supported me and Namdi without ever asking for anything in return. He stood there holding a package in his hands, and for a moment I couldn't speak. I thought you might need this, Donovan said with a smile, his eyes warm and reassuring. I've been looking into some opportunities for you. There's a scholarship I think Namdi and you could benefit from. I felt a lump form in my throat as I looked at him. It wasn't just the scholarship. It was the fact that someone cared. It was the fact that Donovan had seen me, truly seen me, for who I was, not for the mistakes I had made, but for the woman I was becoming. In that moment, I realized something. It wasn't Chijiok's forgiveness I needed. It wasn't his approval. What I needed was the strength to keep moving forward, and Donovan had shown me that. I closed the door behind me, feeling the weight of the past finally begin to lift. I was done with Chijiok. I was done with that chapter of my life. I was ready for the next. As the days passed, the weight of everything that had happened began to settle into a strange, almost peaceful rhythm. I had accepted that my life, the one I had built with Chijiok, was gone. It had never truly belonged to me anyway. It was a life defined by expectations and a name that was never mine to carry. But this new life? This life I was building with Namdi and with Donovan's unexpected support? It was mine. And it was enough. I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had led me here, leaving Chijiok, walking away from a world that had once seemed perfect, but was nothing more than a cage. I had been so focused on trying to be the woman I thought everyone wanted me to be that I had forgotten what it meant to just be myself, to live for myself, and to love myself for who I was. Donovan's presence in my life had reminded me of that. He wasn't a savior, though it often felt like he was. He was a reminder that I was capable of standing tall on my own. It wasn't about relying on someone else to fix my problems. It was about finding strength within myself, and that was something Chijiok had never been able to teach me. Yet, even as I found this peace, the storm in my heart still had one more wave to crash. I had told myself that I was done with Chijiok. I had walked away. But the reality was that I still had unfinished business with him, something I had to face in order to fully move on. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline of Lagos, I sat with Namdi on the porch of my small apartment, watching him play. He was growing up so fast. His laughter, his giggles, his tiny hands reaching out for everything he could touch. It was all so innocent, so pure. I had worked hard to give him this life, one that was full of love and security, but I knew, deep down, that Chijiok was still out there, somewhere, regretting his decisions. I wasn't naive enough to think he wouldn't try to come back. He had already tried, after all. But what would I do if he showed up at my door again, asking for a second chance? Would I forgive him? The thought made me sick. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, the frustration from everything he had put us through. How dare he think he could just walk back into our lives after everything he had done? But I also knew this was the final step I needed to take. I needed closure. I needed to face him one last time to make sure I could let go of all the anger, the resentment, the pain. It wasn't about forgiveness. It was about freedom. It was about reclaiming my life fully and completely. And so, one rainy afternoon, I found myself standing at the gates of Chijiok's mansion again. The place that once held so many memories that were now tainted by betrayal. The gates were wide open, just as they had been when I first arrived, naive and full of dreams. But this time, I wasn't the same woman who had walked through those gates with hopes of love and family. I had been broken, yes, but now I was stronger than ever. As I walked up the long driveway, my heart pounded in my chest. My mind raced with all the words I wanted to say to him, but I knew that words weren't going to change anything. This wasn't about him. It was about me. The door opened before I could knock, and there he was, Chijiok. He looked the same. But there was something different in his eyes, something I couldn't quite place. For the first time he looked vulnerable. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said, his voice quieter than I expected. But I knew you'd need to hear me out. I've been wrong, Alia, so wrong. His words didn't affect me the way I thought they would. I had imagined this moment 100 times, but now that it was here, I found myself almost numb. The anger was still there, simmering, but it no longer consumed me. Chijiok, I began, my voice steady but cold. I didn't come here for apologies. I came here to say goodbye. Not to you, but to the life I thought we were going to have. I came here to finally close this chapter and walk away from everything you've done to me and to Namdi. You're not the man I thought you were. You never were. I could see the pain in his eyes, but I wasn't moved. He had hurt me. He had hurt Namdi. And now he was trying to make it right. Too late. I know, he whispered, his voice breaking. I know I've lost everything that mattered. But Aaliyah, please, you and Namdi are the only things I've ever wanted. I felt my chest tighten as I took a deep breath, the weight of his words almost suffocating. But I knew I couldn't stay in this place anymore. I couldn't let him pull me back into a life of regret. Chijioke, I gave you everything, but I'm done living for you, or for anyone else. I've spent my whole life trying to meet expectations. But now I'm living for Namdi. For me! I turned to leave, but he grabbed my arm gently, his grip pleading. Aaliyah, please. Don't go. But I didn't turn back. Not this time. I had done what I needed to do, as I stepped into the rain. Something inside me shifted. I had spent so long letting the weight of the past define me. But now, as the rain poured down on me, I felt like I was washing away the last remnants of it. I had finally let go. Chijioke had asked me for forgiveness. But the truth was, I didn't need his forgiveness. I had forgiven myself long ago. And now I was free. The door slammed behind me, and I walked away from everything that had held me back. Donovan had been right. I was stronger than I had ever known. And now, with Namdi by my side, I was building the future I deserved. No more shadows. No more chains. I smiled as I looked down at Namdi, his tiny hand gripping mine, and I knew that the journey I had started, this new life, was the one I was meant to live.